David, you know what really grinds my gears?
Recording this episode for the fourth fucking time.
Yeah, that'll do it.
It makes you a little manic, does it? Does it make you a little like this? Like you want to just make things work a little bit? Okay, we're good.
No, now we got to make sure you didn't turn your mic off with those gyrations. No, go ahead and talk.
I'm gyrating all over the place. I'm fast and loose right here. Almost fast and furious.
Cristo.
Like Obama, not like Vin Diesel. All right, here we go.
So, dear listener / viewer, we have now recorded this. This will be the fourth time recording this episode.
So we got it down pat.
David looking a little disheveled this morning because we did it twice last night before we finally said...
that's a little disingenuous to call it morning now, isn't it, Dane?
It's very.
We're verging on evening now.
So after it failing twice on us last night, David decided to drink his sorrows away and woke up with a little bit of a heady splits. So he's...
What are you talking about? I feel great.
Bright lights are not being
I feel great. I feel like I'm coming Robert Downey Jr. circa 1990. I feel great.
But for the iTunes criticizer, David is not intoxicated this morning. He is recovering from being intoxicated, okay?
Yeah, it's a difference.
So,
all right?
How hilarious would that be?
I'm a professional, goddammit.
How hilarious would that be if the episode he came back to was one that you're recovering?
But I look like this. Oh, shit. Okay,
Anyway, all right. So, listen, we're very distraught, very sad. But I mean, you don't care because this is the only
episode your first time.
You're going to see.
Welcome. Welcome.
This
enjoy.
is episode 1 for you. Now,
this is take 1 for them.
Take 1, yes, not episode 1 yet. Take 1.
We've shot an entire movie twice.
We're becoming masters of this topic based on how many times we've gone through this script.
If we fuck something up, we are absolute amateurs.
Absolutely. So today's pre-show episode or topic of discussion is Elon buying 9.2% of Twitter, which now allows him to sit on the board at Twitter, which gives him more of a say in the direction of Twitter. And he has since taken to putting polls on his personal Twitter account of whether or not people think Twitter is sufficiently free speech enough and all that kind of stuff. And boy, has this really, David, please wake up. Boy, has this really triggered the Twitter leftists.
Get out of here.
You're shocked, right?
Unbelievable. For the fourth time. Go get real. Liberals get offended by things sometimes that make no fucking sense whatsoever.
Yeah, the tweet, and I forget the guy's name. Who cares? He's irrelevant. But he did have a blue check mark, which I have found is a very nice shorthand for knowing that whatever's going to flow out of that Twitter page is going to be complete mindless nonsense.
I comply. Should be
I'm outraged by the current thing.
Anything that makes me a better part of our member and establishment, I'm outraged by.
Now, this guy's tweet said something to the effect of Elon Musk being able to buy enough of Twitter to make it more sympathetic to fascists and billionaires should terrify everyone. Not the idea that, a public square app of just people talking, can be just arbitrarily kicking people off, shutting down dissenting opinions. Don't be worried about that, citizen. Be worried about somebody
stifling our First Amendment.
Yeah.
Don't worry about our First Amendment. What's really as important is that people can spend their money in ways that they wish to.
And you know what else is funny about this? You know what?
This freedom thing is too much. We need to dial it back a little bit.
We should.
Sorry.
We should.
Please.
No, I was just going to say that it's hilarious that the tack that especially the Twitter lefties, but leftists in general, what they use, A, shows that they have absolutely zero idea what people with principles actually think, and in this case, libertarians. And B, just shows you that if they were to even feign that they had principles, that you could pretty much just wipe your ass with them. Because their argument throughout the last couple of years, as people have been banned from Twitter and other social media platforms left, right, and center, is the caricatured version that they made up in their own minds about what they think a libertarian thinks by saying, private company, they can do whatever they want. As if our analysis of that particular subject is so shallow and pedantic, to quote the great
it insists upon
thespian
itself.
Of our times, Peter Griffin.
It insists upon itself.
But you'll be shocked to learn that our opinions on that is a little more nuanced than that. But we're just going to leave them to that opinion and say, all right, private company can do what it wants. Private company can be bought a controlling stake in by Elon.
A person's private parts can do what they want.
And if Elon wants to say, I want to be a little bit more free speech absolutist and let people on that maybe some people even find a little bit unseemly, well, Twitter's a private company. Why shouldn't Elon be able to do that? Why shouldn't Twitter be able to do that? But, again, that's just to let you know that when they make a senseless argument that they themselves don't even understand, that they're going to abandon it as soon as somebody, does something that they disagree with.
You hold their feet to the fire and they start having other places they need to be at that time.
So as we get ready to jump in, I think, have we coped enough, David? Are we clear? Are we happy that
I've never been happy?
We're doing this for the 47 billionth freaking time this episode?
I think we did all right. Papa Elon, fix Twitter, even though I've never been there. And I'm ready to get sticky, icky with this unabashed play for money.
The much sadder topic that we have to get into.
Yes.
Oh, yes. The play for money. See, I do it three times.
Fourth time, and he misses it this time. Okay, good. It's great. Glad we went over.
That's all right. I nailed it.
I'm the dirty one too. You call me the artist. I'm the what?
Yes. The line that was real original the first time I said it. Now it seems less so the fourth time I'm saying it. But David,
brought to you by Pfizer.
David feeling a little bit icky about asking the people for money. Me, the greedy capitalist, not so much. We would like to talk a little bit more about this Elon Twitter thing because it has subtle little notes, subtle little hints,
a little je ne sais quoi,
if you will, of very Joker-esque, it's not about the money kind of mentality. Because a very interesting thing that Elon Musk has done before, but especially with this Twitter situation, he's basically goading the SEC and other government regulatory bodies into coming after him. And again, using his money to pull the wool from the collective eyes of the American sheep that are just asleep and abide by whatever the prevailing narrative is, and to show them that not only is your government not here to help, it's not here to regulate anything that you think that they're here to regulate for, more so just to help their buddies and give handouts. And it's the way that Elon's going about it is very Joker-esque.
What are they giving?
Appreciate it.
What are they giving?
To what?
They're giving handouts?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Sure.
I'm lost.
Not hand jobs.
Did I say hand jobs?
No. I just heard it.
That's something that slips out of your brain.
I heard it. It's like they're giving out a hand, whatever you said. And I heard hand job. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This deeper, more fun, Batman, Joker themed kind of.
And that's the kind of snappy repartee we'll have.
Yeah, if
over
you saw
on
the
bonus
awesome
crossing
rug we have in this room, you'd know.
If only you knew.
But those themes, a little bit deeper conversation about Elon, I think will be fun. But it's going to be some bonus content, which you can only get at the $10 a month supporting listener level, because at $5 a month, you get access to our private Facebook page, where we lovingly refer to it as our sane space. You can come in there, chop it up with us. None of us are going to accuse you of killing your grandma, but you can also post articles, memes, suggest show topics, etc. But at the $10 a month level, you get that plus bonus content we don't release anywhere else but the website.
But wait, there's more. If you act now,
So we will be discussing the Elon buying the controlling stake in Twitter and how that parlays with the basically being the good version of Joker and showing us how terrible our government is. And you can get that if you support the show.
Gotta get that boom, boom, wow.
So with that being said, and with David's awesome vocals over there,
Thanks.
Are we ready to jump into the main topic?
Let's jump into the main topic, Dane.
Welcome to Weapons of Meme Destruction Podcast, episode 89, which can be found at wmdpodcast.com/89. You can find it on any podcast app. This one, you will not be able to find on YouTube.
So why are we trying so hard for this goddamn video? It was not even going on YouTube.
Because we have other platforms like Odyssey and Rumble for which we won't get canceled for saying the things that we're getting ready to say on this episode. So to our 70 plus...
Because we've worked so hard, I'm saying fuck it. I think we should throw it on YouTube. Just see what happens. Just see what happens. I dare you, YouTube.
Maybe we will, maybe we won't.
Look at me in the face, YouTube. Yeah, that's the whole reason I put those on, by the way. Fucking dare.
Listen, maybe we will, maybe we won't put it on YouTube, but this is just a helpful rule of thumb for you 70 plus subscribers on YouTube to also subscribe to either one or both of our Rumble and Odyssey channels, because there will come a time when we get bigger and there's more of a target on our back and there are certain things we won't be able to put on YouTube lest we get canceled.
We hope.
So if you are a visual consumer of the podcast, then you will always be able to find the censored videos over on those other two platforms. So go follow those, like, subscribe, share, do all that good stuff. And with that being said, let's get into the topic that would get us probably thrown off of most sites if we were already big enough for the censors to care. So on April 2nd, in a town just outside of Kiev called Bucha, there was...
I still want to do the Peppo.
Every time. It's the same.
It makes me hungry.
I know.
Like, I literally
heard the joke
I
before.
want chicken scallopini. I want a little...
I don't know if this place exists outside of Florida, but every time we say Bucha, David has something to say. So David, go for it.
I haven't had Italian in a long time. It's a great family restaurant. It's not, but it is.
And what's the name of the place, David?
Bucha de Peppo.
Okay.
And they serve family-style portions to individuals.
And they're not paying us for this ad, so you know that we like it.
So, well...
Genuinely.
I mean, like it. It's like... They just give you so much of it. Would you rather have quality or quantity? They give you the latter. So anyway, it just I can't hear Bucha without thinking the people.
So anyway, on April 2nd, Bucha, a town just outside of Kiev, after the Russian soldiers had retreated from the area, several hundred, according to the town mayor, up to 300 were killed. But many bodies, allegedly, were strewn about the streets of Bucha in civilian clothing with their hands tied behind their back and apparently executed. Now, how this is going to go is we're going to tell you what the prevailing cathedral official opinion narrative is supposed to be, what the Russians have to say about it, and then give you our thoughts on the situation in the broader context of always trying to get America into war.
And before we do that, we're going to reiterate, as we've done millions of times on this podcast, not millions because we don't even have a million episodes, but we've done it on a lot of our episodes. We're going to reiterate the non-aggression principle. We know that every life lost, whether it be American, Ukrainian, Russian, Afghanistan, whatever life is lost is always a tragedy. Take two, take four. Tragedy. And we don't condone any act of violence ever. We are staunchly against the war and war crimes that we're about to discuss. So again, with that being said, take it away, Dan.
So the prevailing narrative, I mean, you probably don't need to hear some quotes from some people, but or some of the main role players in this situation to know that Russia evil, they did this, don't ask questions, no sort of, any sort of conflicting information is out there, just believe it today. Zelensky has been saying that Russia's committing genocide in his country. These are war crimes. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says that these are indiscriminate attacks and it can't be normalized. The UN's Michelle Bachelet, has called these things war crimes. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield is actually trying to get Russia kicked off of the UN Human Rights Council, which, setting everything else aside about the story, just as a matter of tactics and optics, that's probably not the best thing to do. If you
try that with your wife. Try that with your wife.
I don't like what you did, honey. Now you don't get to defend yourself.
I'm not going to talk to you anymore. See how your life goes. And
that just makes no sense, right? Because if we're to believe the other things they say about Putin and Russia, they're deranged, they're psychotic, they're acting irrationally, whatever. I think the last thing you want to do to that individual is back them further into the corner give them less options for any sort of resolution that doesn't involve thermonuclear annihilation, and just say, we don't want to hear what you have to say about this story. You're kicked off the council. We're going to pass judgment, and, whatever will be, will be. Doesn't seem like the best look for the United States or other Western nations that allegedly want to see this thing come to a conclusion.
What does an animal naturally do when it's cornered?
Yeah. It lashes out.
All right, guys, you got me. All right, let's do whatever you were wanting to do anyway.
Now, the Russian response, very short and simple, but we're just going to quote Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who says that Bucha was faked by Ukrainian forces and with the intent to provoke a response, a further anti-Russian response that is already out there. All seems pretty straightforward, right?
Sure.
The narrative is neatly packaged, got a little bow on top. It's very simple. Just accept it and don't question, citizen. There's no gray area to observe here whatsoever, and the Russians dispute it. Now, before we get into actually defining what a war crime is, because that's being thrown around a lot, Biden has called Putin a war criminal for these actions. And again, to be clear, as we'll get into in a second, they are war crimes, if, as the story goes, is completely true. But this isn't the first time that Biden has called Putin a war criminal, because there was an alleged, again, Russian bombing of a maternity ward outside of Mariupol, which happened, in early March, I believe it was, early March. We'll have the dates later. Early March, where Biden says that he was a war criminal then, says he's a war criminal now. And his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, had this little tidbit, which I think is very illuminating, had this to say, and I quote, "We do not believe that this is just a random accident or the rogue act of a particular individual. We believe that this was part of the plan."
Huh.
It's pretty...
So he went into Ukraine specifically to do that.
Yeah, that's what he wanted to do.
That's what it was.
All of Putin's posturing is just that. It's posturing. What he's really out to do is just indiscriminately execute Ukrainians left, right, and center. Now, the reason why that particular quote from National Security Advisor Sullivan is so not illuminating, but it's something that we want when you read through these. And keep in mind, everything we just told you is synthesized from mainstream CBS and NBC articles, which again, on the show notes page, wmdpodcast.com/89, you will be able to see all the articles and watch the videos that we did to put this show together, so you can reach maybe the same conclusion as us, a different one, reserve judgment until you have more facts, everything in between. But when you read stuff like that from Sullivan, how the other guy is always evil and never has any other sort of benevolent motives. He doesn't make accidents. Everything's intentional. The atrocities are always intentional.
You know what makes me, Dane? You know what it makes me?
What does it make?
It makes me so happy that I'm American and I can know that we've never done anything like this ever, ever, ever in our history.
A steaming bowl of foreshadowing you're laying down.
A stinky, steaming, huge foreshadowing.
This attempt by Sullivan and the rest of the people in the U.S. regime in particular, attempt to, as we've talked about on this podcast many times before, the Manichaean temptation of seeing the world as light versus dark. Everything the other side does is always motivated by evil and terror, et cetera, et cetera. But everything that we do on this side is always just, if not motivated by benevolence, well, then it's just a mistake and it's regrettable and we didn't mean to do it, et cetera, because we're the light side, remember? We don't do anything bad for nefarious reasons. It's always just an accident.
We had to go fight terror itself.
Right.
We had to go fight Nazis and then made movies about it for 1,000 years.
And again, if you point this out, if you point out these hypocrisies, well, then according to the regime, you're just a Putin-loving apologist for genocide. And, you're not supposed to question your own regime ever. But as David has already said, that our chief focus in being anti-war are the people that are caught, the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. In this case, not just Ukrainians, also Russians who are suffering the full brunt of the sanctions placed on Russia, far more than Putin or the oligarchs. It's the Russian civilians that are caught in the economic crossfire of this, while the Ukrainians are caught in the actual literal crossfire of this. And that's who our concern is for. Now, this term, war criminal, being thrown around is, suffice it to say, we'll let David say if he agrees. I don't think it's a good look for American presidents to be throwing around the word war criminal, in light of some history. David, thoughts?
I have no strong opinion one way or another. No, I mean, my thoughts on it is it's a good thing that our loving president wasn't a part of an administration that committed questionable things for 8 years, that bombed another country into oblivion under the auspices of I don't know, them. We went to war under the auspices of Iraq having yellow cake uranium, but then we started bombing Afghanistan. It gets murky, and to know that he was potentially a part of a cabinet that, by the loosest definitions of war criminology, he would be a war criminal as well. So just clean your own room is what I would say. Clean your own room before you start telling other people to clean their house. That's
usually very good life advice. And as you pointed out on one of the previous iterations of this episode, that, pointing one finger has 3 pointing back at you. So maybe, be a little bit loose. Or actually the point that you actually made, sorry, I misquoted you. The point you actually made was about, it seems, according to what we're getting ready to define by the International Criminal Court's definition of what a war criminal is, that engaging in war is a war criminal.
Right. War.
It's a pretty expansive definition.
Like, no one agrees to the rules of a street fight before you go out and have a street fight. You just figure out who wins by who gets, who's on the ground and who's not. So
right. So according to the ICC definition, and for those of you who don't know, the International Criminal Court is actually who prosecutes allegations of war crimes. And they define it as this: grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, which set international standards for the protection of the civilian population and the treatment of combatants in international and internal conflicts.
Well, what a bang up job they're doing, by the way. What a
really
great job!
A stop to all those war crimes.
My God, they stopped all those war criminals that were Nazis. We definitely didn't land on the moon because of them. We definitely didn't develop the same technology that's going to eradicate our entire species because of this conflict with some of those war criminals.
This and many others. Now, again, on previous iterations of this episode, I went a little bit in more detail through this list. But again, we're going to have the link to the ICC's definition, and you can look up the full list. But just to highlight a couple key points that may or may not apply to some U.S. actions previously. War crimes include things like willful killing, or great suffering, or serious bodily injury inflicted, torture or inhumane treatment of POWs, extensive disruption or appropriation of property, willfully depriving a prisoner of war of a fair trial. 2 that we want to focus on for another list: intentionally directing attacks against civilians or civilian objects, and intentionally directing attacks against personnel that are involved in humanitarian assistance. A couple things just off the top of my head.
Dane?
Iraqi torture of POWs, Guantanamo Bay, the bombing of the Kunduz hospital in Afghanistan in 2015. It's a good thing we never did any of
those things.
Those all seem to come to mind. Remember when Russia bombed the Kunduz hospital in Afghanistan in 2015?
Yes, I remember when Putin did that. Dane?
To be a little bit more on the nose for those not quite, for this is your first episode and not quite aware of David and I's sarcasm. I was actually perpetrated by the Biden administration, the Obama administration with Biden as VP in 2015.
So it wasn't him. At least it wasn't him.
Technically not him.
He was just going, do it, Obama.
Now, the reason in that whole list, and again, the list is much more extensive than that we wanted to focus on the two-headed monster of intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population or civilian objects, is we have a short little list for you over the last 30 years, some incidents that the United States perpetrated which could fit those definitions. And the list goes a little something like this. January of 91, an infant, I got it right this time.
You did?
An infant formula protection plant in Abu Ghraib, Iraq was bombed. In 1991 as well, an air raid shelter in Amira, Iraq. In 1998, the Al-Shaif pharmaceutical factory was bombed in Khartoum, Sudan. A train bombing in Serbia in 99, a radio television bombing in Serbia in 1999, a Chinese embassy bombing in Belgrade, Serbia in 99, a Red Cross complex in Kabul, Afghanistan bombed in 2001, an Al Jazeera office bombed in Kabul in 2001, and another office bombed in Baghdad in 2003. The Palestine hotel bombing in Baghdad in 2003, and 8 wedding parties, 8 weddings were bombed between 2001 and 2013.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Sounds bad. But then we had to do it. There was terror.
It sounds a little bit war crimey to me.
It sounds like, I don't know how to defend it. I'm trying to find a way to tack it back to Putin.
You had better words on the first 3 iterations. But
I did. I've used all my words.
Use out of words.
I mean, if you thought it was bad, you had to go to a wedding. Wait until you go to a wedding in Iraq, I guess. I don't know. There's no real, and again, I'm sure they'd put it a certain way, but like, how do you ever gloss over? Yeah, we bombed a wedding. So anyway, you want to go get lunch
or an infinite. See, I jinxed myself. An infant formula production plant, because as you know,
they believe in breastfeeding.
A lot of wartime use for that.
It's great. It's a nice bonding experience for the child. It gets a lot of the natural immunities through the breast milk. It's important. It's an important child rearing practice. And they just felt very strongly about it, so they bombed it.
And last on that little list of United States atrocities is the still ongoing largest man-made humanitarian crisis in the world, the war in Yemen, which is being logistically and materially supported by the United States as Saudi Arabia engages in what can only be described as genocide, war crimes, and everything in between. So again, David and I reiterate, maybe not the best idea in the world to be pointing fingers on that particular topic.
Things get dicey, things get messy. But what we can always know is that we're always the good guys. Okay? We're always the good We're always the good guys.
Always.
Never a bad thing. But please.
Now,
explain why Putin's bad again.
With that being said, I know what you are saying, dear listener and or viewer. You're saying, yeah, but guys, even if the United States, you guys are engaging in whataboutism. Even if the United States did all of that previously, that doesn't excuse Putin for doing it now.
But again, like, to track back to their piety, like, how can you call somebody a war criminal when you're a murderer, as you're like murdering somebody else, stop murdering people, you disgusting human, shut up and die. Like, you disgusting waste of life. Like,
yeah. And this gets to what David and I, kind of front ran just a second ago, is that, bringing these things up automatically gets you dismissed and demonized as a Putin apologist. But yes, we're not engaging in whataboutism to say that just because the United States did this, that if Putin did what is being alleged of him, that he should get off scot-free.
No.
Unlike, that's exactly what they're doing for their side, is saying, well, we should get off scot-free because every time we did it, it was an accident. It was a terrible mistake. Don't you know? And again, invented very Manichaeist ways. Don't you know that we are the light side and we never do any of that intentionally?
So to track back to the...
Putin always does.
Track back to that, whatever, the ICAA, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. They're doing a bang-up job. They're doing a great job.
At stopping the war crimes.
Haven't had a war crime since.
That's right.
Jesus.
Now,
God.
With all that being said, let's track back to Bucha for a second, because there is a video, and this came from an article in the Daily Mail, this little brief discussion. But on the road just north of Dmitrievka, yeah, that's the one, about 7 miles southwest of Bucha, there is a video of Ukrainian soldiers shooting captured Russian troops with their hands tied behind their backs, just like apparently what happened in Bucha. Now, this video has been verified by the New York Times. So according to the cathedral, you're allowed to believe that this video happened, that it is absolutely what the video depicts of Ukrainian soldiers engaging in war crimes by executing captured Russian soldiers with their hands tied behind their back. Now, it's very interesting to me in particular that the cathedral would have no problem saying, yeah, the Ukrainians are doing this, because what's implied is, well, don't you understand? This is just retaliation, right? The Russians did it first in Bucha. So, war's brutal. And so they're being brutal right back to them. And maybe that's fair as far as it goes. Still a war crime. But that all assumes that Bucha, the official Bucha narrative, is exactly as it's been laid out before us, and that Russia actually did do that, and that maybe it wasn't Ukrainian soldiers doing both Bucha and this one that was apparently on video that's been verified by the New York Times. David, thoughts? You got a lot of consternation on your face over there.
No comment. No, I just think that it's interesting. It's a good thing that we've never and then, so what you're saying is that there might be a possibility that we're trying to hedge it a certain way in order to get our population to feel a certain way that might get it to lean towards intervening into this kerfuffle, if you want to call it.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward that that's probably what the target is of the official narrative.
And this is the first time that this has ever happened in our history.
Unfortunately,
obviously.
Not.
Oh,
now
I haven't studied history,
and we have a list, and we're
going to check it twice.
Get to that. We will definitely get to that in a second. But before we tread on, we do want to bring up, and this will be the last article that kind of, puts more context to what's going on. And this is an article from a publication called The Gray Zone, which according to Wikipedia, quote, "The Gray Zone is a left-wing to far-left news website and blog founded and edited by American journalist Max Blumenthal." Now, Max himself, and The Gray Zone in particular, has been called out many times for not being sufficiently supportive of the American regime. So feel free to take this news source with a grain of salt or not. But the point, and this is what we try to do on the podcast all the time, and why it's important if you want to reach your own conclusion, which we always encourage, is to go to the show notes page, look at the articles, watch the videos that we refer to here, and see if you agree with what you're being told by mainstream media, or if maybe there's a little bit more to the picture. Because the Gray Zone discussed what we alluded to earlier, is that alleged bombing, intentional bombing, by a Russian jet of a maternity hospital just outside of Mariupol. And this allegedly occurred back on March 9th, whereas Bucha was April 2nd. So they're roughly a month apart. And in this Gray Zone article, there is an interview, and we encourage you to go there because the interview is about 6 minutes long. It is translated, and she's sitting there on her couch giving her eyewitness account. She was an expectant mother at the hospital at the time. She actually did give birth, so congratulations to her and her family. And she had some conflicting testimony about what happened that you'll never guess. The mainstream narrative that ran out there around the world about this atrocity, they didn't quote her, and they didn't include information about her. They had video of her, but they didn't quote it. And according to the mainstream narrative, on March 9th, again, that maternity ward was intentionally bombed by a Russian plane. But this woman, whose name is Mariana...
Come on, baby. You got this.
Vishmerskaya.
I
think I got it.
Vishmerskaya.
But I'm just going to say Mariana for the rest of the time because I don't want to butcher her last name. And this is a quote from the article that kind of sums up what she had to say. The article says, quote, "The witness account of Mariana indicates that the hospital had been turned into a base of operations by Ukrainian military forces before the explosions that became the subject of debate. And it was not targeted by an airstrike. But Western media completely ignored her testimony. Her testimony also raised serious questions about whether at least some elements of the event were staged for propaganda purposes and with the cooperation of the Associated Press. So, again, you can read and you can actually see her speak in her own words what her account is. But just to give you the Cliff Notes version here, she was at the hospital days before March 9th. And not only did she say that the Ukrainian military actually was at the hospital before the event, which kind of targets that portion of the narrative that says that this was just a bombing of an exclusively civilian, center, and there was no military involved. She says the Ukrainian military showed up a couple days earlier to take the solar panels from the hospital because they had no other access to electricity. She also said that shortly after 2 explosions, but she never heard a plane and she never talked to anybody else around there or outside that ever said they heard a plane, only the 2 explosions, is that almost immediately after, which suggests that this reporter was there before the explosions, was filming her without her consent. He left the first time she asked him to leave. He came back, and then the second time her husband asked him to leave, he did. But how was it so convenient that this Associated Press member was there to document the fallout from these explosions?
Call it a hunch.
To be able to put together the story that it was a Russian plane in the first place.
Maybe he's just really intuitive. Maybe he just knew that there was going to be something going down there, Dane.
Now, her account...
Journalism.
He's just a journalist doing journalist stuff.
Catch the fever.
Now, her story not only calls into the question the main part of the narrative that it was a Russian plane that did it by saying that she never heard a plane, but also the fact that an AP person was there. Now, we don't know for sure from the article if this AP person was a guy by the name of Evgeny Maletka, but he is an Associated Press correspondent who has just so conveniently been at many events throughout Ukraine for several years that have led up to this. We talked about the Maidan Revolution in 2013, 2014. He was there. He was at the Mariupol hospital bombing, and he was at Bucha. So how does he keep getting to all of these places, one might ask? Well, he happens to be embedded with the Azov Battalion. And if you would like to go back and listen to episode 83, the Azov Battalion is the ultra-Ukrainian nationalistic segment fighting force in Ukraine, the primary one pushing back against the Russians in many areas. But they have some problematic ties, leanings to neo-Nazism.
So you knew you were going to say it. Why is it always
This is not a Godwin's Law violation,
why does it
by the way.
always end with Nazis? Like, this is the worst screenplay ever.
So whatever you think about the Azov Battalion and being Nazi sympathetic and et cetera, what we can be certain of is that as a smaller, less well-equipped fighting force vis-a-vis their Russian opponents, they would have a lot of incentives to want to get the United States in particular, but just other Western powers, more broadly speaking, to get them to come into the war on their side against Russia. So there's some incentive there to, if these weren't staged propaganda events, to at least do that. And the fact that they have their Associated Press mouthpieces embedded with them to be able to do that, get the story out fast so that all the video and heart-wrenching camera work and whatever can run in Western media before the rest of the narrative is told or conflicting eyewitness accounts are referred to. It seems like both they and the Associated Press would have tons of incentive to stage events like that. And so why can't we ask the question? Well, citizen, because
you're a fucking cynical piece
makes
of
you a
shit.
Putin-loving Putin lover.
That's disgusting, Dane. That they'd stage something like that. How dare you? And again, nothing like this has ever happened in our history whatsoever.
In the history of ever. And back to that list.
Except for all those fucking times that it did. All those other times, completely unavoidable. And it's definitely not like this time.
Now, back to that list of historical events over the last 100 years that, again, some are more murky than others about the details, but the simple fact of the matter is that each of these events had a very specific conclusion, and that was drawing the United States into wars. And so this was the list that David was referring to earlier, and I'm just going to go through it real quickly here. 1898, the bombing of the USS Maine, which drew the United States into the Spanish-American War. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which helped draw the United States into World War I. Pearl Harbor in 1941, which drew the United States into World War II. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, which drew the United States into Vietnam. The Naira Testimony in 1990, which was, this one's a little bit more obscure, so I will give you some details about it. A young girl testified in front of Congress that Iraqi soldiers, when they were invading Kuwait, were taking babies out of incubators and throwing them on the ground, only to later find out that I know she was the daughter of an ambassador, but I think it was the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, completely fabricated this testimony. Yet, it was part of the ginning up of support for the first Gulf War in 1990. Then, as most of us remember, is the weapons of mass destruction hoax about the second Gulf War for George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. We have the Ghouta gassing of civilians in Syria in 2013, which was allegedly perpetrated by Assad, but might have actually been carried out by those moderate rebels the United States was arming and training. And then finally, Bucha in 2022, which hasn't yet drawn the United States into direct conflict with Russia. But let's not kid ourselves about that being the end goal.
But other than all those times, when was the last time that something like this happened?
The last time was, according to our list, was 2013. But this list is not comprehensive.
And what happened we were in war for 20 years? The last time we got pulled into a conflict,
right?
Lots of lost lives on both sides, and certain people became very rich from it, and certain people have never recovered from it.
Right.
So, again, this is what's at stake. To take the little sunshine and lollipop out of your mouth. It's happened before, and we're doing it again.
Yeah.
Possibly.
And now I know some people, they don't want to see Pearl Harbor included on this list and stuff like that. And they have their doubts about Lusitania and stuff like that. But the simple fact of the matter is that all of these narratives, some more suspect than others, were used to gin up American support. And I have seen successive polls since Russia invaded in February. And it seems to be ticking according to the people that they're polling in the United States, it seems to be ticking upward in terms of support for more direct intervention of the United States in Ukraine. And David and I have, and many others have rang the alarm bells about, you guys realize this means a direct conflict with the nation on earth that has the most nuclear weapons. And when you factor in both Russia and the United States together, they could collectively blow up the entire planet many times over.
At least 10?
Is that maybe caution is urged in such a situation.
I mean, I don't think you have enough sunscreen for that particular engagement.
Right.
And again, if I was supposed to be terrified about Elon buying some Twitter stock, what am I supposed to be with this story?
And I'm glad you bring up Twitter again, because that brings us to the last portion of the episode, a return back to Bucha, if you will. Because what's concerning about social media's censoring and all of that kind of stuff is that there has been things that have come out about what happened in Bucha that, again, as Mariana's account cast doubt on the Mariupol hospital bombing, is some of these things were posted on Twitter. And we would if your goal is to find objective truth, wherever that may lead you, whatever uncomfortable conclusions you might get from that, it's nice to have a platform that doesn't immediately shut stuff like that down. And we're not saying that Twitter is completely captured by the cathedral, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if the leftists got what they wanted and it was completely captured, this stuff would have been pulled down immediately. So back to Bucha. The Russian forces left the area on March 31st. And as we said earlier, the bodies were discovered on April 2nd. And on March 31st, that mayor, who remember we told you said there were about 300 dead in the city, he posted a video, a selfie video on Twitter where he's celebrating the retreat of, in his words, the Russian orcs. And he makes no mention of atrocities. He makes no mention of hundreds of bodies littering the streets with their hands tied behind their back and executed. It's not until, again, a couple days later when that happens. And there is a clip that was posted and pulled down by the user of the cleanup operation, getting the bodies off the street, which was conducted by Ukrainian soldiers. And in the clip, which was published by a Sergei Korotkov, or a Korotka, something like that, who is, according to the Gray Zone article, a notorious neo-Nazi member. And it shows one member of the unit, of the Ukrainian unit, saying to another one, he says, quote, "God, can I shoot guys without the blue armbands?" And that's because the blue armbands are Ukrainian soldiers and white armbands are the Russian soldiers. To which another of the soldiers in his group says, "Fuck yeah." Now, Korotka has since deleted that video, perhaps fearing that it implicated Ukrainian soldiers in war crimes. And when we think back to that other video that has been corroborated by the New York Times about Ukrainian soldiers apparently retaliating and executing Russian soldiers with their hands tied behind their back, and we look at this video, which was since taken down, which shows Ukrainian soldiers talking about doing that in Bucha, is it completely unacceptable to ask the question that perhaps the Ukrainian soldiers that actually did it on video, corroborated by the New York Times, to Russians after Bucha, maybe did it to Russian soldiers at Bucha, put them in civilian clothing to make it look like they were Ukrainian civilians, and then spread it out to the world that the Russians were engaged in war crimes in Bucha.
Steps, Dane. They wouldn't take that many steps. It's too much work.
It could be. It could be. But the key, dear listener or viewer, is that you read these articles and watch these videos outside of the mainstream, in addition to the mainstream, and see if there's any gray spots for you in terms of either reaching the same conclusion as the mainstream, reaching the same conclusion as us, reaching a different conclusion, or, I know this is hard to believe, but you are allowed to withhold judgment until more time passes and you know more.
That's a weird concept nowadays.
I know. It seems so pre-CERN.
I don't want to digest information. I just want to regurgitate things that I heard out of my little word mouth. That's what I want to do. Now, immediately, 5 seconds after learning about something I had no idea existed.
And be totally outraged by it.
Furious.
Now, a quote from the article that I kind of want to leave it here because it really gets at the whole crux of the matter and why independent media, well, like yours truly, like why do two podcasters with a few hundred subscribers, why are they giving you at least more details to chew on than what you're going to get from these conglomerates that have millions of dollars in budgets and huge staffs to dig into all of the details and give you the information if they were being objective and not propaganda mouthpieces?
Dane, I just want to tag in here and say 141st podcast in Australia.
Hey, listen, we're doing big things.
We're not nothing.
We're doing big things.
We're not nothing.
Okay. Now, the article ends with this, and I quote, "As Zelensky has made clear, Ukrainian forces are desperate for direct Western intervention, in particular the so-called, quote, closing of the sky, with compelling but highly questionable atrocity propaganda filtering from media operations of the Azov Battalion and the Associated Press. Public pressure for major escalation is rising." And whether Bucha turns out to be like everything else on this list that drew America into war or not, let's not delude ourselves into thinking that if that were the objective, if Bucha does tend to be a little bit more nuanced and not exactly as the mainstream tells you it is, Would it honestly be that surprising? Would it be that surprising that a smaller, less equipped fighting force is trying to propagandize to get bigger, more powerful fighting forces on their side? Or why can't we ask that question?
I have an answer for you, Dane. It'll be just as surprising as all the other times that it's actually happened. Just as surprising.
Absolutely. So definitely go to the show notes page at wmdpodcast.com/89. Check out those articles. Watch those videos. Listen to what Mariana has to say. See what you think about, after listening to her, what you think about the Mariupol bombing. See the video. Well, I don't know if the video of the Ukrainian soldiers that was verified by the New York Times, I don't know if that video is still up. It's not in any of these articles. But see about that. See if it has any sort of correlations between what is alleged to have been done by Russian soldiers in Bucha. See what the incentives are on both sides of the table. Maybe the Russians are just these completely inhumane animals that are just running around, committing war crimes left, right, and center, and nobody in Ukraine or backed by the United States is doing that now or has ever done that in the future. Maybe that's the truth. You decide. David. So go to wmdpodcast.com/89. Check out all those articles. Also link up with us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Again, this one may not be on YouTube, but catch it on Rumble or Odyssey if you are the video watcher. And anywhere you find us, like, subscribe, share, rate, comment, all that stuff is the way that you can give back and help support the show without monetarily contributing. Although we encourage that because you definitely want to hear how Elon is the Joker.
And for the love of God, hopefully the fourth time was the trick on this episode.
God save us.
God save us all. Stay safe. Stay free. See you next week.